So I'm Marilieke Engbers and I teach governance and ethics at the MBA Leading with Purpose, and I teach strategy for finance and control students. But I was a student myself also because I did a PhD and I defended my thesis last year. So I still feel like a student in a way. Well, the course at the MBA, what I aim for is that students actually, governance for me, I try to operationalize it by reflecting on the unsaid. I researched the unsaid during my PhD. And for me, what I mean with operationalizing, I think ethics is a lot about taking the responsibility for the things you're thinking and feeling, but not saying. And that sounds maybe, I don't know how it sounds, but I think people often assume that these thoughts are big thoughts, it's like whistleblower topics, but it's much more subtle. It's about small things that seem irrelevant, but when you do not address them in time, they can grow fast, become big issues. So it's all about reflecting in time, taking, the responsibility. How do you behave? How do you take how do you respond to small, seemingly irrelevant dilemmas? And what I try to do, so that is for me ethics, and governance is about leadership process for me. So it's all about how do you define things. And for me, governance is about leadership processes between people that are also helped by rules, informal and formal rules, but are sometimes also not being helped by rules. So rules can also impede the governance or the leadership process. So it's combining those two things. How do you lead a leadership process? By reflecting upon your own contribution. You have to reflect upon how do I enter the room, with what state of mind, what is my intent? So it becomes very personal. You have to turn the gaze towards yourself instead of only to the outside world. And I think that is key if you want to become a leader, that you have to, I think, also model your behavior. If you want your employees to be ethical persons, you have to be ethical yourself. And in order to become ethical in that sense, you have to understand more about you as an instrument. And that is what I think I try to at least make my students more aware of. Ethics already starts with how you define ethics. So because words are, they are helpful in a way because they help you talk to other people and reflect upon things and discuss those and read about it. But words are also sometimes a bit of dangerous because they seem to explain something, or they might give the impression that we talk about the same thing, but at the same time we do not. So for me, ethics starts with defining. It starts with clarity. It starts with reflection on, what are we doing here and now? And is this the right thing to go? Sometimes you might think this is the right way to do something, but in the eyes of the other person, it's unethical. So it's for me, it's a lot about from what perspective do we look at ethics? Who decides what is ethical? If I look at your behavior, I might think it's unethical, but if I reflect on something from your perspective, it might be very ethical. But who's to judge? I researched boards. So boards is a context in which we have CEOs plus the non-executives. So this is a very specific context. And it's also very different from normal teams, I would say, because normally you have one leader and several employees. But in the boardroom, it's the reverse. You've got several people who are the leader, who are evaluating one person, the CEO. This is from the agency perspective, because there are different ways of looking at the boardroom. And what I did is exploring, what do these guys and girls, what do they silence, or how do they, they have very little time to discuss things. They're a large group, so they always have to decide what to say, not to say in a way. And what I found is that they actually do not always behave very consciously. So they respond in the moment, because you cannot you don't know what's going to happen. So it's not possible to decide prior to the meeting what you're going to say. So a lot happens pre-consciously, subconsciously. And what I did was explore what is exactly under the surface of what's being said. And when you explore the unsaid, I found that people, basically these boardroom members, experience many, many dilemmas and even conflicts. So in my book, I try to explain these conflicts and these dilemmas, and in a way, the ethics of being a board member, and how difficult it is. So it's very easy for non-board members to judge how these board members deal with stuff. But when you are a board member, it becomes more clear why it's so terribly difficult to do this correctly. And actually, is it possible what we ask of them? Is this something that is humanly possible? If you look at the irrational behavior of people, that we're just we're emotional. We tend to defend ourselves when we're being attacked. And if we take that perspective on boards, is it actually realistic what we ask of them? So this is more like a big question that I ask, that discussion that I start with. So this is not what I'm going to deal with my students, because of course I look at the context of the boardroom and the organization, and I use what I've learned in my course. So, but actually what I try to do with the book is raise a topic, like I said, and reflect collectively on what are we doing in the boardroom. I think I have become maybe more compassionate with individuals, because I've been seeing, how people judge each other. Because what I did is I was observing a board meeting, and then I interviewed everyone afterwards what they were thinking and feeling. And while they were explaining what they had felt and thought but didn't say during the board meeting, they were telling me their stories, their narratives. But also in the narratives, they were also telling me what they thought others were thinking and feeling. And I also heard them judge each other a lot. And the other one did not know how the other person was judging the person. So I realized, there's so much unsaid. So how it informed me with my teaching is that I think that it's key that we first try to understand by looking, by observing, by discussing cases together with the students before you, for example, ask them, what should you do, or what should this be the right answer? It's like, first, let's have some compassion. First, let's understand. And if we have compassion for what they do, we will also have more compassion for our own dilemmas. And we might soften up our own expectations about ourselves. Because if we are kind to ourselves, we tend to be more kind to others as well. So it's a lot about compassion, I think. But also, it's not just compassion, it's actually quite painful to look at your own thoughts and feelings. So it's not soft, it's I would say almost very confronting. So in that sense, it's both. It's soft and hard together. It's like, how can you be very critical towards yourself, but also compassionate at the same time? The ultimate goal, I would say, is that for me, it starts with, and this is the question, where does ethics start? It starts with reflecting upon your own unintended effects on the others and on the group process. So what I also do in the course is reflect upon what is going on in here. When you enter this group of students with the teacher, how does this unfold over time in a 2.5 days course? How do we deal here and now with the dilemmas that we're facing in this classroom? And when we are able to reflect upon our own effect on the group, unintended, not just the good side, it's also the bad side. How do I affect, that someone feels unhappy because of my presence? Do I see it that I might affect the other person in that way? It starts with the intent of wanting to experience, turn the gaze towards me, but also the dark side of me. It's not just the good side of me, but also the dark side. They have to write an evaluation report. And it's a combination of, first, I want to see that they have understood the theory. So that is more like reflection. Are they able to reflect upon the theory and also implement the theory? This is what I think normal teachers do. You want to see whether the student has learned, your theories properly, cognitively. And the other thing, what I do is read in the reports whether they are able to, like I said, describe specific moments and how they, shaped those moments. And when students are able to be very specific on, I am such a person, I will be reading their personal stories in the evaluation. So that in itself is very personal. And for me, I have criteria in order to make very clear how I evaluate them. So I evaluate your knowledge and I evaluate your reflexive practice. And I also offer them formats and tools to do so. And I can observe, I can evaluate to what extent they use these tools. And of course, there's also the process, that unfolds. And I have to be very explicit on my own biases because I'm a person, I'm subjective. I might tend to like one student more than others. So I think it's also really important that it's a fair process. So it's not just my evaluation, it's also the process that comes with evaluating students that should be fair, because they should be able to feel safe to judge me when I judge them, because it's like we judge each other. I have to judge them because I'm their student, but it should be done fairly. And in order to do it fairly, they should also be allowed to judge me in a way, if judging is the right word, but evaluate each other explicitly. I would say that this is that I try to do this by being explicit on like ground rules, tell them that this is my way of teaching, that it's all about also my, I have to turn the gaze also towards myself, being present and being part of this group. And I am in a way the leader of the group because I evaluate them, I set the ground rules. So for me, it's not being explicit on the ground rules, but also allowing them to give feedback. And this is more like something you do by being present and being, consistent in your behavior, and being also explicit on the fact that you expect yourself not to be consistent all the time and congruent all the time. So when I sense someone is actually not happy, I could sense it incorrectly, but at least I'm going to check, do I do something that makes you feel such and so way? And so it's being very conscious of the group dynamics and seeing every signal that it's, that I am off track as a gift to explore whether I am, being ethical in a way. So it is being very sensitive. So if you design a course like this, there must be a lot of time to be able to take time and to, not being forced to tick the box of things. But it's also, I think, about your intention. If I have the right intention and they are allowed to criticize me, then they will know. And if I only say that I am okay with being criticized, but I respond defensively in the moment, then I am being incongruent. And then the course actually is terrible, because then I teach something that I'm not modeling. So yeah, this is a lot about the unsaid unfolding in the course. And if I'm able to read what is being unsaid and also respond correctly to what is not being said. And that's always, exciting, but also scary. Everything, it's like life, Well, I think it's practical because I use different types of casework. Casework that is, for example, I start with a case that is typical for, I think, most of the organizations. So, but it's not just like read the case and discuss it. It's like read it, but then we're going to play. It's like we use role playing. But this is not your own case. It's a case of someone else, but you're taking a role in it and we reflect upon it. So it is in that sense not practical, like, okay, you've got 5 tips and going to do this or that, but it's by understanding what is unfolding in organizations, you will be able to recognize it when it unfolds in your own organization. So in that sense, it's practical because it's it's clear, it's bringing in real life into your course. Apart from that, I also, like I said, use here and now, which is like real life. So it's like, how should we deal here and now with the dilemmas that we have with the students and the teacher? And what does it mean for real life unfolding outside the classroom? And third is that I ask my students to bring in a personal case. And we will reflect upon this personal case. Everybody will have an hour to reflect upon their own case, and I will instruct them to reflect in a specific way. And then during this case, we will also explore options how to respond to this case. So, so I have more tools, but they're always about real life situations. And the ones who are personal are, of course, the most difficult. So we start with cases that are not about themselves, but are more safe, general cases. So we work towards the personal cases. Ethical sounds, I think, often as big, like I said, like whistleblower type of topics. But I am already happy when students, for example, bring in cases like, we had a meeting and I was thinking and feeling, what are we discussing here? And we have discussed this 5 times. The problem does not change. I'm fed up with this meeting. So, what should I do? So this is already hard one, I think, but this for me is ethics. You have a colleague and you need to collaborate, but you do not fully trust this person. How do you deal with him or her? How do you deal with your manager who asks you to do too much in too little time? So for me, these are the daily issues that you deal with are for me ethical, because if you choose to silence and to accept the way the leader behaves and you feel pain and you feel frustrated, then already that in itself is ethical, because your manager doesn't know that you experience those things, probably. From my research, I found 4 typical archetypical dilemmas. I found 3 types of conflicts. So basically, I expect those conflicts or dilemmas to be dealt with. The cases will always deal with those categories of dilemmas and conflicts. One of the things that remains unsaid is what we think about each other. Not only about what we think about the other person as an individual, but also about how do I think he or she performs. And it's really difficult for someone to give feedback. I mean, we all know that, you have a colleague and you think that he's always too late or so. And it's difficult to give that feedback because you might risk enacting a relationship conflict when you do it, when you give feedback in an incorrect way. So to avoid this problem, I think it starts when we accept as humans that we're not just perfect individuals. We have all kinds of failures. We've got faults. We've got, biases. So why do we make such a fuss about being imperfect? If we all accept that we are imperfect, then it becomes so much easier to talk about this dark side, our faults, our biases, our tendencies, which are not always positive. And There is even an author which I like who said, you know, we're busy with with two jobs. The first is the job itself, and the second job is to actually cover up that we are insecure, that we have feelings, that we are, you know, that we make mistakes. So what if we all would stop doing the second job by acknowledging that we are imperfect and we are insecure, or we are angry, or we are frustrated? That is for me a way to make the unsaid more discussable. So, and this starts with individuals who allow themselves to ignore, to acknowledge the fact that you're not perfect and you don't have to be perfect.